In the early hours of August 31st, 1997, Princess Diana was killed in a Paris car crash. The public's grief was immediate and overwhelming. But how did each member of the royal family actually respond? The reactions across the family couldn't have been more different. Some handled those impossible days with grace. Others faced criticism that nearly toppled the institution. And some reactions only came to light decades later. Let's look at how every member of the royal family responded to the tragedy that shook the monarchy to its core. Queen Elizabeth II's reaction to Diana's death became the defining controversy of those 7 days, and nearly cost her the public's support entirely. When news reached Balmoral that Diana had died in a Paris car crash, the Queen made a decision that seemed straightforward at the time. Stay in Scotland with her grandsons, protect them from the media, and allow the family to grieve privately. But back in London, the public was gathering by the thousands outside Buckingham Palace, leaving flowers, weeping openly in the streets, and growing increasingly furious at the royal family's silence. The tabloid headlines grew savage. "Where is our Queen? Show us you care. Your people are suffering. Speak to us, ma'am." The flagpole at Buckingham Palace stood empty. Royal protocol dictated that the royal standard only flew when the monarch was in residence, but to grieving Britons, it looked like calculated coldness. What the public didn't know was that behind closed doors, the Queen was desperately trying to shield William and Harry from the tsunami of coverage. She ordered newspapers removed from Balmoral, televisions kept off, radios silenced. As she would later explain, "This week at Balmoral, we have all been trying to help William and Harry come to terms with the devastating loss." Finally, on September 5th, 5 days after Diana's death, the Queen returned to London and delivered only the second live broadcast of her reign. Standing in Buckingham Palace, with the crowds visible through the window behind her, she spoke words that would help save the monarchy. "What I say to you now, as your Queen and as a grandmother, I say from my heart," she began. She was an exceptional and gifted human being. In good times and bad, she never lost her capacity to smile and laugh, nor to inspire others with her warmth and kindness. The following day, at Diana's funeral, the Queen made an even more powerful gesture. As Diana's coffin passed, she bowed her head, a stunning break in protocol, since the Queen bows to no one. That single moment of visible respect helped redeem her earlier silence in the eyes of the grieving public. One of the most powerful images from that week was a 76-year-old man walking behind Diana's coffin alongside 2 grieving boys. What the public didn't know was how close that moment came to not happening, and what Prince Philip said to make it possible. During the conference calls about funeral arrangements in those chaotic first days, officials were debating whether William and Harry should walk behind their mother's coffin. Suddenly, Philip's voice cut through, anguished and protective. "It's about the boys," he cried. "They've lost their mother." The Duke had initially opposed the idea of his grandsons making that long public walk. But when it became clear the procession would happen, Philip made a decision that would become one of the defining images of his relationship with William and Harry. At dinner the night before the funeral, he turned to his grandsons and said 4 simple words. "I'll walk if you walk." William, who had been resistant, agreed. And so, on September 6, 1997, the 76-year-old Duke walked alongside his grieving grandsons, his son, and Diana's brother through streets lined with more than 1 million mourners. What cameras didn't fully capture was a private moment that came to light years later. As the procession passed under the Horse Guards parade arch, Philip, thinking cameras couldn't see them, reached over and touched William's back in comfort. He later confirmed he'd done it deliberately, trying to support his grandson away from the public eye. Princess Anne would later recall her father's approach. It was a question of, if you'll do it, I'll do it. That was him as a grandfather. If that's what you want to do, and if you want me to be there, I will be there. Prince Charles occupied perhaps the most impossible position of anyone in the royal family that week. The ex-husband blamed by millions for Diana's unhappiness, and the father who had to tell his sons their mother was dead. He was absolutely distraught. He fell apart. Charles knew, instantly, that this was going to be a terrible thing, that he would be blamed, that they would all be blamed for Diana's death. In the early hours of August 31st, Charles was woken at Balmoral and informed that Diana had died. He then faced the task no parent should ever have to face, waking his sons to tell them. Harry later described the moment in his memoir. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He put a hand on my knee. "Darling boy, Mummy's been in a car crash." Charles told him the doctors had tried, but she didn't make it. Pa didn't hug me, but his hand did fall once more on my knee, and he said, "It's going to be okay." What happened next revealed a side of Charles the public rarely saw. He insisted on flying to Paris to bring Diana's body home, over his mother's objections. The Queen believed the Spencer family should retrieve the body since Diana had lost her royal status in the divorce. Charles refused. Charles wanted to take the royal flight to Paris, but the Queen wouldn't allow it. He fought harder for Diana in death than he had ever fought for her in her lifetime. He flew anyway, accompanied by Diana's sisters, and ensured her coffin was draped in the royal standard. When he arrived at the Paris hospital and saw Diana's body, medical staff reported he turned white, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. One nurse said it looked like he'd been hit in the face. In the weeks after the funeral, as images emerged of Charles as a devoted single father, public opinion slowly began to shift in his favour. But in those first terrible days, he had put his ex-wife's dignity above his mother's wishes and his own survival instinct. The boys Charles had to wake that morning were 15 and 12 years old. William and Harry lost their mother and had to grieve in front of the entire world. William was staying at Balmoral when his father came to tell him the news. "I remember just feeling completely numb, disorientated, dizzy," he later said. "You feel very, very confused, and you keep asking yourself, why me, all the time? Why? What have I done?" In the days that followed, William found solace in the Scottish wilderness, at one point disappearing into the woods for 14 hours. "I was in Balmoral when I was told that my mother had died," he would say years later. "Still in shock, I found sanctuary in the service at Crathy Kirk that very morning, and in the dark days of grief that followed, I found comfort and solace in the Scottish outdoors." Harry's memories centred on regret. His last interaction with his mother had been a phone call the night before she died, one he'd kept short because he wanted to get back to playing. "All I do remember is regretting for the rest of my life how short the phone call was," he later said. "And if I'd known that was the last time I was going to speak to my mother, the things I would have said to her." The decision to have them walk behind their mother's coffin has been debated for decades. Harry has been blunt about it. "I don't think any child should be asked to do that, under any circumstances. I don't think it would happen today." But he also said he was ultimately glad he did it. William described the impossible balance he had to strike, between me being Prince William and having to do my bit, versus the private William who just wanted to go into a room and cry, who'd lost his mother. He admitted he used his long bangs as a kind of shield during the ceremony. "I felt if I looked at the floor and my hair came down over my face, no one could see me." Perhaps most heartbreaking was Harry's revelation about when he finally broke down. "Once my mother's coffin actually went into the ground, that was the first time that I actually cried. There was never another time." On Diana's coffin lay a letter from Harry, addressed simply to Mummy. Princess Anne's relationship with Diana had always been distant, even cool. The two women were fundamentally different. Anne practical and no-nonsense. Diana emotional and openly vulnerable. Diana's death left Anne speechless. Anne has rarely spoken publicly about her own reaction, which is entirely consistent with her character. What she has done is defend her mother's controversial decision to stay at Balmoral with William and Harry, instead of rushing back to London. "That was exactly the right thing to do," Anne said in an interview years later. The Queen's choice to give her grandsons structure and protection in those first terrible days was, in Anne's view, a grandmother's instinct rather than a monarch's mistake. Anne also offered insight into her father's role, recalling how Philip had told William and Harry, "If you'll do it, I'll do it. If that's what you want to do, and if you want me to be there, I will be there." Anne attended Diana's funeral and, in a small detail that speaks to her practical nature, wore the same fitted black jacket she would later wear 25 years later at her own mother's funeral, proof that some things, for Anne, transcend fashion and sentiment. Prince Andrew and Prince Edward had known Diana since childhood. They'd played together on the Sandringham estate when they were kids. But their roles in the week after her death were less about personal grief and more about institutional duty. Of all the royals, Andrew had been closest to Diana. Only a year older than her, he was described as the strongest friend and confidant Diana had within the royal family. When Andrew was away fighting in the Falklands War, Diana wrote him letters to keep him updated on family news. Years later, during her painful divorce from Charles, Diana believed Andrew was the one member of the family who had her back when she felt everyone else was against her. On September the 4th, 4 days after Diana's death, Andrew and Edward became the first senior royals to return to London from Balmoral. Their mission was twofold: sign the Book of Condolence at St. James's Palace and gauge just how hostile the public had become toward the royal family. Edward was reluctant. A palisade had to insist he engage with the mourners, telling him to do as he was told. But both brothers went out among the crowds at Kensington Palace, speaking with people who had gathered to mourn. The outpouring of grief they witnessed helped the family understand the scale of public feeling and the danger the institution was in. Neither Andrew nor Edward has spoken extensively about their personal reaction to losing Diana. But their actions that week, being the first to face the crowds, testing the waters before the Queen's return, reveal the role they played. Not grieving brothers-in-law, but royal soldiers sent to the front line. Sophie Rhys-Jones, Edward's girlfriend of 4 years, made a different choice. She didn't attend Diana's funeral at all. Sophie worried that her resemblance to Diana, both had short blonde hair and similar features, might upset mourners. She made the decision in what was described as a caring and thoughtful way, and the royal family fully supported her. Camilla Parker Bowles occupied perhaps the most impossible position of anyone outside the immediate family, the woman millions blamed for destroying Diana's marriage, now forced to watch from the shadows as the world mourned. The first person Charles called after learning Diana had been injured wasn't the Queen. It was Camilla. At that point, he'd been told Diana had only suffered a broken arm. When he called back at 3:45 a.m. with the news that Diana had died on the operating table, Camilla wept. "My God, Charles," she said. Camilla's first response was as a mother. "Those poor, poor boys," she said. Her next worry was for Charles, whether he would break down, whether he could hold himself together for William and Harry's sake. Within hours of Diana's death, press surrounded Camilla's house in Wiltshire. She became public enemy number 1. The woman who had been planning her gradual public introduction, Charles had thrown her a 50th birthday party at Highgrove just weeks earlier, now had to disappear entirely. Camilla didn't attend Diana's funeral. She couldn't. The public hatred was too intense. In the months and years that followed, she was snubbed by high society in ways she'd never experienced before. When the royal nanny, Tiggy Legger-Burke, got married in 1999, Camilla wasn't invited. She was banned from socializing at certain aristocratic estates. The social isolation became so severe that Queen Elizabeth, who had known the Parker Bowles family for decades, began calling Camilla a much maligned woman. "They've got to blame someone," Camilla told a neighbor. She waited. For years, she stayed largely out of sight, supporting Charles from the sidelines, while the public slowly, painfully began to forgive. It would take 8 years before she and Charles could marry, and decades before she would be accepted as queen. The youngest members of the royal family were shielded from the worst of it. Princess Beatrice was 9. Princess Eugenie was 7. For the York sisters, Diana wasn't just the Princess of Wales, she was their aunt. Just the summer before, they'd holidayed with Diana, William, and Harry in the south of France. Now she was gone. At Balmoral, the same efforts to keep newspapers and televisions away from William and Harry extended to their younger cousins. Neither Beatrice nor Eugenie has spoken publicly about their memories of that week, and perhaps that's as it should be. They were children caught in a tragedy that consumed the entire world's attention. Some grief deserves to remain private, especially when you're 7 years old and trying to understand why your aunt isn't coming back. Looking at how every member of the royal family reacted to Diana's death reveals something profound. The institution responded not as a unified front, but as a collection of individuals, some with grace, some with grief, some in ways they'd spend years trying to explain. A grandmother tried to protect her grandsons and was vilified for it. A grandfather who rarely showed emotion made a grieving boy feel brave enough to walk behind his mother's coffin. An ex-husband defied his own mother to ensure his former wife was treated with dignity. 2 boys held themselves together in front of the entire world, then lived with that trauma for decades. Diana's death didn't just reveal the royal family's vulnerabilities, it changed the monarchy permanently. The institution learned, painfully and publicly, that the British people expected more than protocol. They expected humanity. Whose reaction surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and please like and subscribe to see more like this.